interesting. I just kind of thought, I would say the thing that really locked it in for me was seeing the play Our Town, not a Buddhist play necessarily, but it's a play that if you've never seen it, there's a character who asks toward the end of it, who has the opportunity, spoiler alert on this, to come back from the dead. And to choose one day in her life to look at, to watch it, to participate in, and to view it. And she chooses her 13th birthday, I think? 12th birthday? Yeah. Emily? Yeah, I think so.
Does anybody remember? Are you reading Our Town at school? I think it's her 13th birthday.
13th birthday.
That sounds right to me too. Maybe 50th, but something around.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, so she chooses that, and she finds it so painful to watch because she didn't realize how much she treasured those experiences until she didn't have them anymore. And so it was the kind of the specter of death, or the idea that that was over, this impermanence, that was no longer available to her, made her really put her in a lot of pain. And she asked the stage manager character, who's kind of narrates and oversees everything. She says, Emily said to him, does anyone ever really experience life deeply every moment? And he said, no. He said, well, there are some folks who do. He said, philosophers and some religious folks, and maybe, but no, it's not very common. And I remember seeing that in a theater when I was about 13 years old and saying, I want to be that person. I want to be that person who experiences life that deeply. I'd already had death in my life. My father had already died when I was 9. And I had a fair amount of other death in my life. And so I was very aware of the shortness of life, of the preciousness of life. And so I really wanted to explore that. And I didn't want to have a life where I wasn't paying attention, where I was really being able to experience things very deeply. And it seemed that Buddhism was something that was pointing me in that direction, because that's something I would really emphasize. Also, it's really a rare religion that focuses upon personal happiness in a lot of ways. I mean, that's really what the Buddha kind of started with his basic teachings about. How can you become a happier person with all of this suffering that there is in life? And I thought, that's interesting. Not many religions I've looked at really ask, are you happy? It hadn't happened very often. I hadn't encountered that very often. And I felt, okay, I want to check this out. I hope that long story helps. That's a good question. Questions? Yes?
Well, like you talked about how Buddhism originated in India, or the branch that we follow came from along in Japan. How does the different branches or sects of Buddhism kind of differentiate from each other?
That's a really good question. How the different sects of Buddhism are different from one another. To explain, it did start in India. That's where the Buddha was from, and then traveled into China. That there was a Chinese Buddhism, and it was the Japanese discovered it through Chinese Buddhists, and there are now Thailand has a very large Buddhist population. Vietnam does as well, where one of my teachers, Thich Nhat Hanh, is from. The differences between them, I'd say there are cultural differences, and I think every religion that has that is in different parts of the world kind of appropriates some cultural traditions into what they're doing. And so, I mean, Christianity is certainly that way. And Christianity is, you're going to find things very different in, say, Argentina than you're going to find in Canada or in France or, things like that. It's going to be really very different because they bring in a lot of their own cultural things. When I was in France, living at Plum Village, Thich Nhat Hanh's monastery there, I had a nice talk with a person who became a good friend. He was a French young man of Vietnamese descent who is now a monk, has become a monk at Thich Nhat Hanh's monastery. And where I said something about, they kind of adhere to this sort of thing where a lot of very much a separation by gender things, like the men live over here, the women live over here, and they really don't, come together very often. This one emphasizes celibacy. Not all of them do. American Buddhism does not emphasize celibacy. It's okay to be married and have children, like I do, and so do some of our priests. But when I asked him about it, he said, that's actually more of a Vietnamese cultural thing than that is a Buddhist thing. Because I said, I don't really see anything in the literature that specifically says gender separation and that kind of thing, or celibacy for that matter. And he said, it's just something that grew up in the culture. So you're going to find some that are more like that. Some that really emphasize a lot more of a monastic experience, living in a monastery. That Buddhism is something that's very much about going off to a community and being by yourselves with each other. Whereas where we are, I mean, certainly my center, and it's really very prominent in American Buddhism, it's more prominent to be about living your daily life in the world. It's not about getting away from the world. It's not about escaping. It's about using these tools to exist within the world. So I think that started in America to be the culture of American Buddhism right from the first really large one, which was the San Francisco Zen Center. And that was started actually by Japanese practitioners of Buddhism in the 19th century. And so it started from there and really has grown up. And now they have a farm, a monastery, they have different things around Northern California. It's very big. And the founder of Minnesota Zen Meditation Center came from there. That would be Katagiri Roshi, David Katagiri, who I never knew. He died like right before I started studying Buddhism. He died like a year before. But I studied at his center, and his widow is still a friend. So I know her, Tomoe Katagiri, and she's actually America's expert on sewing these things. So she's a teacher there too.
Could you tell us more about that? Is it a purse? Do you put things in there? What is
No, it is, okay, here's the story. The Buddha was walking along with his cousin and closest friend, really, Ananda, who really acted as his kind of assistant and like chief administrator, really, for his growing following. And he said, it came up in the conversation that people were saying there were lots of different type of monks around and ascetics and people studying things. How do we differentiate who are the followers of the Buddha or who are Buddhists? And the Buddha said, we should come up with something, some sort of a pattern, or something that they can wear. There are robes, but there should be something special that they wear that identifies them at it. And they were walking past a rice paddy. And the Buddha said, yeah, something like that. Something that looks kind of like a rice paddy, the design that they have of things. So, 2,600 years later, that's what we sew. It's been going on for 2,600 years of this pattern that basically has to be all stitched together by hand, no machines to use. And as I was never a sewer, and it was kind of a joke between me and some priests that I knew, where I would say, it's that sewing thing that here I had. And it was wonderful to have a friend, a dear priest who runs a monastery in Iowa, Shokin Weinkoff, who's a friend, has become a friend, and he's the one who said, that's nothing, it's just one stitch, then another stitch, then another stitch. And he really taught me, and my sewing teacher, Kyoku Tracy Whalen, especially taught me that really what it's about is the practice of putting this together. Patiently putting one stitch in at a time according to the pattern, and deeply concentrate, and don't get ahead of yourself, don't stress out, just keep going mindfully one stitch at a time. Right? If you blow a whole row of them, then your teacher is going to kindly and compassionately say, you'll have to take that all out and do it all over again. And it was a nice lesson for me to be able to say, okay, I can do that. I'm not going to get frustrated. It was really a very valuable experience for me to be able to do it. And then when I finished up, which by the way, it has a cool little thing on the back. This is the finishing thing, which is really cool that it's this particular stitch that goes all the way back 2,600 years too. Kind of looks like a cricket. And then I gave it to my teacher. My teacher was K.U. Ken Ford. He is K.U. Ken Ford. And what I did was I handed it over to him, and it was blank on the back. And then he filled it in. He filled in with calligraphy, and he gave me a name. He gave me this was October 7th, 2017. And he gave me the name Shokai, which is Japanese, or this particular translation, for illuminating ocean. And so that was really very, very kind of K.O. Ken Ford, who is now in kind of ill health. He lives near here, as a matter of fact. He lives down near the bottom of Montreal. And it was wonderful of him to do that. He and I had been meeting regularly, one-on-one meetings for a couple of years. And Illuminating Ocean was really nice. I think he partially kind of inspired by the idea of, I try to illuminate things. I'm a journalist. So that's part of my, is trying to give insight to people. So in writing, and I'm a writer, that's what I try to do. And Ocean was wonderful because he knew I was really inspired by large bodies of water like Lake Superior. I'm a lover of Lake Superior, where I really have a real connection to that. And also, that was the name of that show was part of our his teacher, who was Kagiri Roshi. So that was very gratifying to have that too. So so that's where I got the name Shokai, which I've had for 4 years now. And I only use it in Buddhist context. I don't use it in my professional life. Any other questions? While I take a break.
Year and a half especially, as being somewhat dreadful, and associate or attach a lot of suffering to experience of illness and disappointment of being separated from activities that we loved. Our teams, our clubs, our classes, our special occasions, the dances or proms or whatever have been taken away. That we attach a lot of pain and disappointment to that. And then, of course, as you mentioned, some of the understanding of racial violence and animosity and climate change that's very frightening and upsetting for us. How do we, as people experiencing some very disappointing, hard things, not attach suffering to that? Just, it's like, of course we're suffering. But then how would you handle that, or how would you expect a young person who's practicing Buddhism to deal with the suffering of this present time?
I think that it's an excellent question. It's a very complex question, and I would say it's really been the central question of a lot of our lives in the last year and a half. I would say the key to it is acknowledging that there is suffering. Don't deny it. It's there. It's about being with it. And as for being peaceful with it, which I think is really I did say, that's the hardest one. That is the hardest one. It's the hardest of the Four Noble Truths for me, and I think it is for a lot of people. How do I be peaceful with suffering? I think the first step is about attachment, and it's about attaching to wishing things were different than they are. There will be suffering. The suffering will be made worse by concentrating deeply on wishing, on the wish that it was different, that there wasn't a pandemic, that, well, I could say that George Floyd hadn't been killed, but I think with George Floyd, that was an awakening for a lot of people that was overdue. It was an awakening that needed to happen in a lot of ways, if it was George Floyd or if it was somebody else. And so and as far as climate change as well, there's a lot of suffering. That's a difficult one I think about a lot. I think about all of these a lot, but I think about that a lot because I think of, yes, impermanence, and this is really what's happening with climate change is a big reminder of impermanence happening all the time. Things are really, really changing very quickly. I have a friend at the Sangha who got back from a trip through the mountains from the West, and she was from out there. And she was so sad because she said, it's not coming back. What she remembered of the Western United States, the forested lands of the Pacific Northwest, she said, it's not going to come back. It's gone now. And so it's going to turn into something else. Everything will turn into something else. And so I think that has helped me somewhat, is that recognizing that everything is impermanent, everything is going to change. And so just kind of being able to be at peace with that, see how things unfold. And though it's really hard, try not to push it away. Try not to push away these lessons that we can learn about the preciousness of life, about how quickly things can change. Boy, has this been a reminder of impermanence constantly. I mean, from the beginning of the pandemic, and how quickly everything changed. That really was a very harsh reminder of everything can go away like that. And so I think it's just working on trying to, and it is a process, to learn to try to be at peace with the changing nature of everything. And so again, I kind of start from the place of try not to attach to an outcome, that I want it to be a specific way, I want it to be different than it is now. Yes, there's that loss, yes, there's that pain. That's there. You have to acknowledge that, and you have to be with the pain of that. So, I hope that helps. Any other questions?
We are honored by your presence. Thank you so much. He started by reading a little magnet from his refrigerator of the 4 main things about his faith life. I wonder if you could start thinking about, if someone asked me, what are the 4 main things, or the 3 main things, or whatever you want to say,
hands and God showed the bow. So I bow to you all. Thank you.
And in our worship services where we have shared peace and harmony with a hug or shake one another's hands, we've learned to honor one another this way during the pandemic now when we gather together.
See these cultural things come together like we're talking about. They blend.
I want you to stand up before you leave today, pick up your chair, you're going to go back, but go find one person who's in your side and say hello to that one person. See if you can have a
Thank you all.